أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وارزقنا فهم النبيين وحفظ المرسلين اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome everyone uh, to a special session this month's special session inshallah. I chose this topic of literature and reading, and it's a strange topic. I don't know if I've never come across any scholars who have spoken on this subject in particular. In fact, the idea of it among Muslims, I won't say in Islam, but among Muslims, the idea of literature being fictional literature and reading fictional literature is considered to be taboo, and in some circles, it's even considered to be haram to do so. And even though I have not actually come across any properly worded fatwa that definitively says that reading fiction is haram. I've only ever heard contemporary scholars give their 2 cents about it. And most of them, I feel like when they speak on their subjects, they don't actually, it seems to me like they're speaking on a subject that they don't actually understand they themselves. They don't read literature. They don't actually read any books themselves. And it's just one of those things that they evaluate from a distance, where they will say something like, well, fiction is lies and lying is haram, and therefore fiction is haram, which is, there are many problems with such kind of statements, one of them being false terms and false definitions. But I'm of the opinion that it's one of those nuanced problems in the Sharia. It's not something that you can give a blanket statement about. Similar to something like music, something like art, drawing and painting, even sculpting for that matter. There are certain aspects of it that are definitively haram, depending on what is being presented and what is being indulged in. And then there are other aspects that, if they are cleansed and if they are purified, and if they are made and indulged in for a purpose, for a meaning, then one of the principles in Sharia is that if the prohibition is lifted, then if the cause is not there, then the prohibition is lifted. If the cause of the prohibition is lifted, then the prohibition itself is lifted. So if there are no prohibited elements in that, then and it is going to produce something good, then there is no cause to prohibit it. And therefore, Islam does not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And this is unfortunately kind of like the modern approach to many things, whereby everything is just black and white. And Islam is reduced to something that is black and white. Arguments such as, the Salaf never did this, so it's haram if we do it, or it's an innovation if we do it, which was never the case, really. I mean, even at the time of the Salaf, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was music, there was storytelling, there was exchange of ideas. These things were there. There were poets who would recite poetry in front of the Prophet, and there was a poet whom the Prophet himself asked to recite a few lines, and he went on reciting until he had recited almost 100 lines of poetry. when we began the Sirah, I spoke about mythos and mythology. And I gave the definition of mythology as not being something that is entirely fabricated and made up, but something that in and of itself might have a true origin, or at least some truth in it. But that doesn't make it a lie, even if the components in there are fabricated or fictional. And fiction in that sense is not a lie. In fact, one of the scholars, Ibn Hajar, said that stories are not lies; they're just untrue. He tried to soften it up in the sense that they do contain components that are made up, but they are not classified by Sharia as lies. And this is why you will never find a definitive fatwa that says that fictional reading, or I mean, in the modern sense now, we've got film and stuff like that, watching or engaging in that is haram. A definitive statement to say that it's haram, because a lie carries the intent of deception, right? And a lie itself is disguised to appear as truth for it to be a lie. But a story is something that is known from the very beginning to be a story, to be imaginary, to be fictional. So the one who's producing it, he knows and makes it apparent that he's making something that is fictional. So he's not lying about it. The components in there might be made up, but within those components, if it is properly done and if it is properly drafted, can be purposed towards telling a truth, can be purposed towards imparting wisdom, imparting knowledge, imparting morals, and many other things that you would otherwise not encounter in the real world. So they're not completely, lies, but if they are done well, they can have incredibly positive effects. And at the same time, there are forces that use this medium of transmission to also have negative effects on people. So it's a matter of weighing each one in its own merit and deciding and evaluating it as to whether or not it is something that is beneficial to the individual or not beneficial. If it is going to cause harm, which in this case would be a moral harm, a mental harm, a psychological harm, a spiritual harm, as well as an effect produced that would have a physical harm. And if that's evaluated from whatever fictional entity it is, whether it's a book or a film or whatever, then that specific entity can be classified as, okay, that's not permissible for Muslims to indulge in. But there are other works that can be permissible because their benefits far outweigh their harms and are all the more important, especially now in our age and time. Because one of the greatest losses of our age is it's undoubtedly is the loss of language, the loss, I would say, of the nobility of language, of virtuous language, of language that is elevated, that has got some sort of in its expressibility and its articulation, it does not carry vulgarity, by which I don't necessarily mean insulting or abusive words, but just a kind of expression that brings the human being lower in rank rather than elevate that human being. We have lost the erudition, the skill of articulation, the skill of elocution, of articulation of realities that are higher than what we can just perceive in the day-to-day. So where a poet might describe something as mundane as a chair with elaborate words, that kind of language, that's what you would call an elevated language. It gives that object all the more value than just being a simple chair on which somebody would sit on. And you see, like when the Quran uses such elaborate words to describe things like the arsh of Allah, you know, just calling it arsh by itself, it elevates it to such a high degree, to such a high rank, than to just call it a seat, something that you would sit on. That's it. You see, in our age, language has become crude. Its vitality has been, I feel like its vitality has been leached. And as a result, the stories that human beings produce have become just equally vulgar and and crude. And it's like the hearts of those people who are telling these stories, their hearts have been turned to stone. And so what those hearts produce have also been turned to stone. And the unfortunate thing is that we are on the consuming end of those kinds of stories. Now, elevated speech is, in and of itself, is a teaching, because that kind of speech, the manner in which those words are expressed, the manner in which dialogues or exchange of ideas are taking place, the manner in which human beings converse and have discourse and have resolution between themselves, these things, the type of speech that is used in all of these circumstances, in all of these scenarios, but the speech itself can be a virtuous thing. Aside from what is being said, aside from what is being discussed, the speech alone, by the way it is used, the way the words are used, that alone can be a virtuous thing. But the problem is that that kind of elevated speech, daily life, which is, it's governed by, routine and necessity and day-to-day activity, daily life cannot bring about that kind of speech. You don't speak that way when you're buying onions at the market, or negotiating with the shopkeeper, or giving instructions to so and so as to how you want something done. You don't speak in that Shakespearean way of articulation. You see, elevated speech does not apply in those mundane circumstances which are part of daily life. So where do we find elevated speech then? We find them in the stories. You see, and it's because of this reason, historically, even in the past, that kind of speech that I'm referring to can only be found in a setting which is deliberately curated that way. It's composed that way. So you have poetry and you have prose, and you find elevated speech is embedded into whatever narrative is taking place in that poetry or in that prose, in that story, because it is curated that way. The words are carefully chosen. They are put in a certain way to convey a certain meaning, or multitudes of meanings if it is well written. You see, so one thing you'll find, I mean, we, and by extension our children, are subjected. I mean, this is one of the tragedies of our time, is that we now suffer the mediocrity of passionless people teaching words that once emanated from people whose hearts were filled with passion, and we are taught the meanings of what those people say by the type of people who themselves today have no passion in their hearts, because modern society does not want people to be passionate. It's one of the agendas of modern society, of this new world order that is being built, is that you cannot be passionate about anything. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's one of their agendas, you know. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. I mean, happiness is something that is equated to superficiality of life, you know, items and goods and things that you can buy and keep yourself happy with. And even then, you will not really own that, but you will be happy. This is a kind of society, a kind of humanness that is completely without passion. There's no strong emotion that goes with that, that you would express what the heart is truly feeling. And you know, works like Shakespeare and works like you know, like the Iliad and Odysseus, and this is from Western culture. I mean, from our culture, it's very interesting that our culture itself, the Muslim culture, is not without its own share of fictional works, which is something that really surprises me, because it seems like, you know, the last 19th and 20th century has sort of made it look like fiction is, like I mentioned in the beginning, is completely haram. You know, it just like it doesn't exist in Islam. Like Islam just doesn't tolerate it at all, you know, which is not true at all. Our tradition is very rich with fictional works, both in poetry and in prose. And it has some truly remarkable storytelling as well. There's like there is Ferdowsi, who's a Persian scholar. Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, which is a collection of the tales of the great kings and Persian heroes, like Rustam, for example. Amazing stories he's got in there, where he shows the heroism of these kings and their chivalry, and how they carried out their great achievements and whatnot. These are like the epics of these individuals. There is one of the most interesting stories I found was, which I actually wanted to write as like a retelling of that in English. Is by Attar of Nishapur, and his story is titled Mantiq al-Tayr, the Conference of Birds. It's a very interesting story. He's got all these birds, they get together, and they're like undergoing a crisis, and they want to choose somebody who will rule over them and govern them, because the kingdom of birds is so vast, and unlike other animals where like the lion is the king of the jungle and whatnot, and man has got his own ruling, so the birds want somebody to lead them as well. And so they all get together, and they're now having this everyone's giving their ideas. So one of them says, the only bird that is worthy of ruling over us is the simurg. And the simurg, which is Persian, is the phoenix. And in Arabic, it's the al-anqa. So the phoenix is actually, interestingly, is of a Persian origin. You know, it's not a mythical creature of Greek origin. It's of a Persian origin, and so they say, well, we have to now go and find the simurg and ask him to come back and rule over us. And at that time, all the birds now, some of them, they all start making their own excuses. Oh, I can't come because I have family, and I can't come because I've got this issue, and I can't come because I can't fly. And everyone comes up with their excuses, and then in the end, only 30 or so birds, they decide to set out. And Attar shows them going through 7 different realms before they reach the simurg. And he shows through metaphor in that each of these 7 realms is like a vice that they need to overcome. So there's wrath, and then there is greed, and then there's lust, and so on and so forth, until they reach this. It's a very interesting story. And then they meet the simurg, and he tells them that if you've journeyed this far, to come and see me through all these realms, then you don't need me to come and rule over you. You've overcome he's kind of saying that if you overcome all of these, then you're essentially fulfilling the role of the Khalifa that was that Allah intended to send to earth, to this world, who is a self-governing individual. So a very interesting story by Affar. There's another one by a scholar called Ibn Nafis, and I really like this story. It's prior to him, there was one, I think, that was written by Ibn Rushd or someone else. One is called I don't remember the title of that one. He demonstrated it's kind of like a desert island story where this being just appears, this human just appears in an island, and he's sort of using just his rational capacity, arrives at an understanding of or an acknowledgement of the divine. And so Ibn Nafis wrote a sort of a response to that in much the same way, but his story was really amazing because Ibn Nafis was a medical practitioner. In fact, he had planned to write about 300 volumes in the field of medicine, and he only managed to write about 70 before he passed away. And that's just amazing that somebody would plan to write a 300 volumes of works. And this is writing by hand, by the way, in the 9th, 10th century. But he wrote this, and using his medical knowledge, he demonstrated, I think the work, I don't remember the name. There's a Latin title for that. It's called Theologius Autodidactus or something like that. In the Arabic, it's I think it's قصة كامل في سيرة النبوية. It's the story of Kamil, who is the character, in basically in understanding the seerah of the Prophet. It's such a brilliant idea. What he does is he shows in the story that there's this cave, and in this cave there's all these elements come in, different clays come together, and then the humidity it comes to the right level, and the temperature to the water content, and all the ingredients, they basically come together, and from that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can create a human being just from that, in much the same way that he created Adam. And so here comes out Kamil now from this cave, and which is an amazing thing to write at that time, because it basically responds to all these evolutionary stories, the idea of random things and random sequences taking place over billions of years, and this one turning into a fish and then turning into a monkey and all that stuff. In that tale, Ibn Nafis shows, using science, he demonstrates the core theme that the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that such a thing is not difficult for your Lord, to create mankind from nothing. He demonstrates it through cause and effect. He shows you, like, look, if this component with this component mixes together, and the temperature is correct, and the humidity is right, and the air content is correct, and he puts it all together for you and shows you how, like, just in the same way that a chicken can be hatched from an egg, the human being can be created from just organic matter, and life is breathed into him by Allah. So Kamil now is the complete human being that he refers to, Kamil. And he comes out, and now through his rational faculty, he starts looking at the world, and he builds up an understanding of the divine. But Ibn Nafis argues in his narrative that through the rational faculty alone, you can come to knowing that there is divinity, but knowing divinity himself, like knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and understanding him as your Lord, and then worshiping him as is your purpose, that you can only arrive at through an emissary of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning, he demonstrates in that book, in that story, that the existence of a prophet in reality is by necessity. Meaning it's not an option, that maybe a prophet might come or not, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has necessitated in that He's put in a principle that there will be prophets sent to the human being, which is what the Qur'an says, that to Adam, your send down and messengers will come to me from you, will come to you from me. And so he demonstrates here again that through his rational faculty, he starts reasoning out, okay, this prophet, who would he be? What would his qualities be? He goes right down to even explaining whether this prophet would have any male descendants or any female descendants, which is again a really, like, he shows in there as an example, in that he says that by necessity this prophet would have to have only female descendants. He cannot have sons, because in the traditional sense, the sons of the prophets typically were also prophets, right? So he references like Ibrahim, and then Ishaq, Ismail, who is his son, and then Yaqub is Ishaq, and then Yusuf. Then he references Daud and Sulaiman, Zakaria and Yahya. You see, so when he shows you that, and then he says that, but he's the last prophet, Muhammad. So he can't have a son after him, lest he be regarded as a prophet as well. It's a very, very interesting response to that question. Why did the prophet's sons not survive him? But that's his opinion. I'm not saying that that's qat'i. That's just his interpretation of it, and he puts it in that medium. But this whole story is that's what it is. It's a story. But in that story, you can see all these components that he's imparting: the reason, the philosophy, the morals, the ethics, the acknowledgement of divinity, and of coming to an understanding that if somebody was to read that, it should help you better understand yourself as a Muslim, rather than, lead you astray in that sense. So, our tradition is not all that parted from fictional telling. Maulana Rumi, I mean, just an amazing collection. I have his poetry here. I read it every other day. It's just amazing that he can express these ideas, that if you read it, it cannot lead you astray. It's just amazing. It will help you. It will actually make you softer. Your heart will soften towards religion rather than harden towards religion. And those people who would then come up and say, oh, yeah, but Aqidah problems here, haram, you should not read. Those people, I think their hearts need to be softened. Those people have hard hearts, honestly. Because if you can't see the meaning in it, if you can't see what that man was trying to do, a man, by the way, who was not just a poet, he was a scholar before he became a poet. Maulana Rumi is called Maulana Rumi because he was a scholar who had mastered the madhahib. He had mastered the schools of thought in Aqidah. He was a sheikh. He was a scholar in his own right. So he's not speaking out of ignorance when he's, giving you certain... This is all part of literature, and it requires someone to understand how literature works, how it functions, for you to be able to evaluate and see whether or not there is truth here, or there is falsehood here, or what is it? Can we take something from this? Is it, if we're going to start coming and reduce it down to a level of fiqh and say, is it permissible or not permissible? Then, we need to be able to evaluate it properly. Somebody sent me a video about some scholar in the United States, claiming that, oh, look, see, he's saying that fiction is haram. So I looked at the video. It's like 3 minutes long. I said, well, I can spare 3 minutes. So I looked at the video, and he started off by saying, just this morning, and this is him who's talking, right? This scholar. Just this morning, I accidentally read a novel, and it was actually not my intent to read it, but it was by accident. So I was just wondering, how do you accidentally read a novel? I mean, you actually have to pick it up, don't you? There's intent there. But then I just read it because some brothers had asked me to evaluate for them whether it's haram or it's halal. So I picked it up and I read the back of the novel. which is in the literary world, it's called a blurb, right? So there's a couple of paragraphs, sometimes just one paragraph, gives you an idea of what it's about. And I read it in the back, and it was a love story. And I told him that you should not read this. This is haram. And I just looked at that and said, talk about judging a book by its cover. First of all, you accidentally read it. That doesn't make any sense to me. And then you just give a fatwa based on what you saw on the cover. I don't know. If you don't speak about something that you have got no knowledge about. This is what the Qur'an tells you. Don't speak about things of which you have no knowledge. If you're going to evaluate, this is the problem with modern Muslims, is they'll just pass an evaluation on something without really understanding what it's about. Stories are a human thing. It's something that we do. We have been doing since the beginning of our existence. The Qur'an, almost 70% of the Qur'an is stories. Now, the Qur'an is not going to deliver fictional stories. That's a fact, yes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks absolute truth. He doesn't need to invent allegory. He doesn't need to. Invention is something that we do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates from origin. And so every story that he presents is still his story, but his characters are not made up. They're real because he created those characters. We don't have the ability to create real worlds and real characters and give them agency and give them plot or give them direction. We don't have that ability, but we do have imagination, which is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so by that gift alone, we are able to create imaginary worlds with imaginary creatures and characters and imaginary plots, and then build them in such a way as to deliver something of meaning, a kind of a simulation in which we can draw morality or ethical discourse or explore certain virtues which we would not otherwise be able to do in the real world. Because not everyone goes through a heroic transformation in their life. Not everyone goes through an epic battle from which they emerge, with hard-learned lessons. Not everyone goes through such incredible tragedy, so as to come out with a transformed state of mind. But you can read about it. You can understand what that virtue is through the lens of somebody else, even if that somebody else is a fictional character. And through that person's lens, you can experience something about that transformation or that virtue or that chivalry or that heroic achievement. And I'm not just speaking in terms of, rhetoric over here. There are actual studies that have been done on this regarding people who read fictional works. One of the things that they found in a study was that people who read fiction have a greater vocabulary than people who read nonfiction. And this was like a conclusive study. They did it multiple times over with different subjects, and it was just conclusive. Those people who read fiction had more vocabulary and their language was much more refined and elevated, is what I spoke about, and more expressive than people who only read nonfiction. Because nonfiction, the vocabulary set, and I'm someone who's written both, so I can attest to that. The set vocabulary of nonfiction is very limited. You're only going to talk about the words that you're going to use are going to be specific to that subject matter. But in nonfiction, a writer who is doing nonfiction will use multiple synonyms and adjectives and adverbs and all kinds of things to describe all number of things. So something as simple as a chair, like I mentioned, could be expressed in so many different ways. And depending on how elaborate the writer wants to be, will use so many different terms and words. Some of them, you might not even know before you read that piece. And so just because of that practice and exposure to those and application in context, those words are understood as they are used in context. So in many cases, even those individuals might not really need a dictionary to tell them what the word means. They might just understand it out of the context that it is used in. And they will have a greater and expansive language ability. Another study showed that individuals who read who read fiction had greater empathy and social diversity in their thought. Or social diversity was not that the actual word used. I'm just filling in. I'm trying to remember the name of the study, but they did say that they had a greater empathy cultivated in them, a greater emotional range. Sorry, social emotional range, which means that these individuals who read fiction were able to understand and sympathize with other people more than people who only read nonfiction. You know, they were able to understand feelings and nuanced emotions with other individuals just because they had encountered something of the likeness of which the other individual may have gone through a fictional telling. You know, it's not like they didn't get exposed to that, but because they were, let's say, able to read a certain book and really experience that character's emotional transformation or tragedy or difficulty, it cultivated within them a sensitivity to the emotions and the feelings of other individuals. So they were able to relate with other people. Their psychologies were softened, so to speak. Their hearts were softened, and they had more empathy. They were able to express better. You know, all these studies, these are not made up. One other study showed that this I think was really the most profound study. They found that reading about if you want to, I'm trying to explain it properly. Like if you want to know about running, for example, right? Going out to do some running, like jogging or something. They found that the group of in their study was given just information about that activity, and then another group read a story about a character who was running, and they did like brain scans when the two were reading. So one was non-fictional, just information about the activity, and then the other was fictional, an entire story about the activity being done by another character. And when they were doing the brain scans, they found that in both cases, because both people were reading, multiple parts of their brains had sort of lit up. But those who were doing the non-fictional reading, the fictional reading, those who were reading about the story about the running, the same parts of their brains lit up as would lit up of somebody who was actually doing the activity itself. Like, you understand, like you've done psychology. It's like without having doing the activity, the same parts of the brains would light up. The same neurological patterns would fire, even though you're not doing the activity itself. And they concluded from that fiction teaches more, teaches better than nonfiction, because you can give somebody several, academic paragraphs and whatnot, and it would serve that purpose. I just knocked over the. Thank you. Yeah, you can skip it. It would serve to give them the information they require, but that same information or that same concept, if it is a universal concept, for example, trying to teach, like I can tell you what morality is. I can give you several hadiths about good manners, about akhlaq. I can tell you, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam this is what he said, and so reported that he had this kind of character, and like that. I can give you all that. But if I was to do it to you in a story format, if I was to, let's say, make up a character and give this character a purpose or a meaning, and then those same akhlaq, if I was to put them into that character to show you that this is how the character responds to situations or scenarios in the world in which they are in, then the likelihood of you understanding through that is much higher, according to the science. Because your brain is going to actually light up those neurological pathways that are associated with performing those exact same actions of being polite or being empathetic or being kind or being whatever. The same parts of the brain are going to light up. And that's why nonfiction is, well, that's why fiction, when I'm referring to fiction, I'm not referring to just, I'm referring to stories in general. I'm referring to stories, even if they're true stories. It's the manner in which the articulation is done, the way in which the story is being told, that's what makes the difference. Why do we look at, Musa and Al-Khidr? It's an amazing story, just a truly amazing story. It's got all the components of storytelling. Anyone who's done literature can study that and tell you, as a framework, it's got all the components of storytelling. You've got the status quo, then you've got the hero's calling, and then you've got the hero. This is called, in literature, this is one of the styles of storytelling. It's called the hero's journey. The protagonist has the status quo, and then there's the hero's calling. So he has a quest now, and then on his quest he finds the wise master. The wise master imparts knowledge and wisdom to him, and then there is the conclusion or the climax, or what you would call the eschatos of the story. You see, and now the hero comes back. He returns back from the journey. This is the odyssey of the hero as a transformed individual. So if you look at Musa and Al-Khidr, that's precisely what happens. It's exactly what happens. He meets this, he goes on this journey. He's got a quest. He wants to find out who is more knowledgeable than him. He meets with Al-Khidr. They set out now on this odyssey. Events happen. Conflict takes place. That conflict results in resolution. You see, he tells him, you can't ask questions. He does something that is scandalous, and he damages the boat, and he tells him, why did you do that? And so there's a conflict now that takes place. Conflict then results in resolution, and then he finally gives the climax of everything. He gives an explanation. See, I did this because of this, and I did this because of this. And now you, as the reader of that story, the one who's following that story, and by the way, anyone who reads that story is always following Musa as the main character. Anyone, whoever reads that story is always following Musa as the main character. Is not following the one who accompanies him, his servant, who some say is Yeshua or Joshua. Nobody's following Al-Khidr, even though he's somebody who is admirable in that story. You've got all these other characters who are highlighted or spoken of. Nobody follows them. Everyone follows the main character. That is a character-driven story. And so here is the Qur'an, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْأَمْثَالَ لِلنَّاسِ. Allah presents allegories in this way for the benefit of man's understanding. Because he can give you a set of instructions, a theoretical discourse on what all those components are, what morals and ethics he wants you to get from that. But if you follow the story, you immerse your mental capacity in the story, and you absorb those morals and ethics without you needing to know the scientific theoretical version of that. You understand it, and that's what it's meant to do. It's meant to touch the heart. It's not meant to give you facts. And so we can't rely, in terms of our understanding, we cannot rely purely on facts. to say that Muslims should only read non-fiction because fiction is haram. And I mean, there are multiple stories like Yusuf, the story of Yusuf, which is, I mean, just incredible. We're always, again, who are we following? If you look at the story itself, it's just, it follows the same storytelling structure. You have the status quo. Yusuf is with his home, with his family. His introduction is not introduced from birth. He's introduced when he has a dream, because that's the moment that propels the story forward. He discusses that with his father. His father tells him to keep it quiet. Right there, you've got a conflict now. That conflict is going to resolve itself further down the line. You see? And then the status quo is upset when his brothers conspire against him. And now his life is taking off on a different turn. Now he's on a quest. He's on his own Odysseus. He's on his own Odyssey. Not Odysseus. Odysseus is the character. You see? And he goes through this entire transformation, and he encounters, you know, this adventure and that adventure, and then there is the king's wife, and what's her name? Zuleika, right? And then the king's own dreams, and then, you know, he rises from lowest to highest, and he undergoes transformation. The Qur'an says, "Kadhalika," like this, we established Yusuf in the land, that he could settle wherever he wants to settle. You see, now here is where you find an incredible thing about that kind of literature, is that divinity is never removed from whatever is transforming or whatever is happening in the story. The stories of old always maintained some higher power as guiding all the components, in order to show and demonstrate here that it's not an isolated incident, or it's not just a random event, set of events. Modernity has transformed that completely, because modernity's agenda is targeted towards secularism. And secularism, by its very definition, is the removal of God from all affairs, not from state affairs, because that's what they presented it as. Or it's just from state affairs, you see, just from governance. No, it's not. That is secular. That's a specific term in political and legal theory. But secularism, which is the ideology behind that, is not just purposed towards political and civil affairs. It's targeted towards all human affairs. And one of the ways in which they achieve that is through storytelling. Now, if you look at what has been produced in storytelling over the last 3 decades, I think 3 decades is a good field of study in both written literature as well as film and media, because film is a medium of storytelling. It's just slightly different. It's not slightly different. I mean, it's got a different way of doing it, but it's still a storytelling medium. Much of what has been produced, not just from the Western world of Hollywood and all that, but even from the other parts of the world, much of what has been produced has now been echoing that same secularistic ideology. It's just a random set of events. There's no real depth to what is happening. The characters that are introduced don't actually have any personal transformation. There's no heroism taking place. There's no chivalry. There's no, because we have something called futua and muru'a. You see, look at Ashab al-Kahf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you what the standard of what futua is. Chivalry is not going guns blazing everywhere and explosions and the hero walking away from a big ball of fire taking place behind him or something nonsensical like that. That's not chivalry. You see, that's just happenstance. You got lucky, and that's what it is. That's not heroism. But that's what heroism was presented like in the 90s, with big explosions and whatnot. Now that has been removed completely, because even the very object of masculinity and femininity has been under attack in storytelling. You see, You don't have individuals or characters who embody manhood and womanhood anymore. Now you've got things like girl bosses, you know? The story starts off with just it's all feminism. It's just the all-powerful woman who puts the men in their position, you know, they put their men in their place. So male characters in many of these stories, in written work as well as in film, are are sort of presented as these cowardly, useless, dumb, idiotic entities that have got no real contribution to society. And the female characters, they don't really have anything to transform into, no sense of achievement or moral transformation of their own. No, they have all the abilities and super abilities and powers and everything from the very beginning. They were born with it. And basically, all they have to do is realize it. And society as a whole needs to acknowledge that. And that's just as far as the male and female entities go. We're not even talking about the other decadence and the depravity that comes after that with the LGBTQ extensions, you see? And these are the things that we're exposed to. Now, even though you may have a strict household in which you're not watching, you don't have a television, you're not watching these things, you don't have any of these books, you have nothing of these sorts, we're complete strict Salafi, you know, khalas. I can guarantee you, you're still leeching off that ideology because you're interacting with other human beings who are engaging with those things in some way, shape, or form, and you are leeching off that ideology from them. It is shaping you, whether you acknowledge it or not. You don't need to believe what I'm saying to you, but you can do the test on your own. Just examine your own thoughts, examine your own speech, and look at how you speak. Look at the choice of words that you have. How are you articulating? What are you articulating? Even when you're listening to lectures given by celebrity scholars, you will be leeching off the same standard of speech because those characters as well, they speak the language that they think the youth understand. And so they speak in the same depraved, lowered, reduced language. They try to use the same pop culture references. They have got, I mean, this is my personal experience. You can disagree with me if you like, but this is what I have seen. You know, they speak in the same lowered sense. Every preacher has got the same target language. They have the same set number of phrases that they will commonly use. Who told the prophet this 1400 years ago, scientific miracle, Sharia compliance, all these type of terminology. This is part of their set vocabulary. And that's how it functions. This is how modern culture works. It works on set vocabulary. There's no elevated language. There's no elevated prose. When you meet somebody and you observe, if you want to try this, go to a wedding function or something, and just look at how people converse with each other, especially if they don't really know each other and they just, sort of met. There's this sense of awkwardness, and their speech is very much like something that just came out of, like a TV serial or a film or something. It's like that dialogue sense, scripted. They don't know what to say to each other. And they'll use that kind of dry humor that is typical of film and TV serial. That filmic dialogue, But that's something that's scripted. That doesn't apply to real life. Now, if that's the language that most people speak, if that's the language that they're absorbing, then that's what they're going to exhibit, and then that's what their children will exhibit, who will interact with your children. So even though you're going to keep the door closed, unless you're living in a cave, you can't separate yourself from that. So how do you change that? By allowing yourself a chance to engage in proper literature, in proper storytelling, in stories that have meaning, that have purpose, in stories that, the authors were not interested in representing their own ideologies or replicating themselves. A lot of modern stories are the author just living out their own fantasy. You see, the writer just wants to live out their own fantasy. And so The book that they're writing is just a mirror of themselves, and is at the same time purposed to act as a mirror for the audience, for the reader, because that's what they want to present to the reader, that you can see yourself in the character. The idea of modern literature, modern storytelling is, can you see yourself in the character? But that's not what storytelling is meant to do. A story is not meant to produce a mirror. It's meant to produce a door or a window. At the very least, it's meant to give you a glimpse into another world. And at its purposeful point, it's meant to open a portal for you to enter into another domain. One of the studies that they did was in terms of stress. So they did they did different subjects and different stress reducing methods: drinking coffee, listening to music, watching a show, going for a walk, and I think there's something, I don't remember, there's something else. But in all those tests, they found that just reading a non-fiction book for 5 minutes reduced stress 100%. And I'm not making this up. You can find the study. Reduced stress 100%. 60% from painting or doing art. Reading actually reduced 60% more than painting or doing art. 100% than drinking coffee. I think it was 300% than going for a walk, and 600% from watching a film, which really amazed me, like 600% from it. And then it made sense after I read the whole study, because the film, even though it's giving you a story, it's just force feeding you imagery, whereby when you're reading, you're engaging your imaginative faculty. And what they found was that it puts you in a completely altered state of mind, which is akin to a meditative state. And they found that the frontal lobe, like the imaginative faculty in the frontal lobe, and the language component of the brain, were highly activated when reading a book. 6 minutes, 5 minutes, I think it said 6 minutes. I just rounded off for 5 minutes of reading a nonfiction book reduced stress 100%, regardless of what the stress was. Because it puts you in a state of imagination, and that's really what this is all about. It's about imagination. You were gifted with this, the imaginative faculty, the imago, that helps you conceptualize realities that your eyes cannot see, your ears cannot hear. But you can conceptualize, you can think about that. And many of these realities pertain to your own transformation, morals and virtues and ethics. You can't see these things. I can't show you what love is. I can't demonstrate kindness to you in like, oh, look, this is what shape kindness takes. I can't do that. But through the expressibility of it, the imaginative faculty can conceptualize that, can see, how kindness is executed, can see how love is expressed, can see how, tragedy can transform somebody, how a trial can really take somebody, how suffering can affect somebody to the degree of making them into a much more better and stronger person. These things are transmitted through stories. So how much time do we have? Okay, so I'm just going to finish on one more thing. I could go on this. I have, like, in my notes, my literature study. I have a few things that I think would be really helpful to people who want to know what to engage in and what to read. And reading is what I would recommend over watching a film, even though there are many films that are also beneficial, but that's its own medium of storytelling. That's different. So we're not talking about film today or television. That's its own medium of storytelling. Talking about just reading. there are a few things that I would recommend to look out for in terms of evaluating and seeing whether or not this is something that you should read or should not read. The first thing is, does that story, does it provide you with a sense of companionship and brotherhood? Some what we would call a suhba and al-ukhuwa, which brotherhood, by the way, applies to sisters as well. So sisterhood is included in there. So it's not just about, but things like friendship, fellowship, counsel, nasiha, being that idea that you do not have to go through a difficulty by yourself, that you can always have somebody who will be there for you, who will hold, give you a shoulder to lean on, who will hold you if you fall and raise you back up. That idea of true friendship. I'm not talking about friendship like, in your workplace, you've got, the guys, they get together or something like that. I'm talking about friendship, the kind that is in and of itself a virtue. That it's the kind of a friend who may as well be related to you, but just isn't related to you by blood. It may as well be a brother, may as well be a sister to you. You see, may as well share in your inheritance. That kind of friendship. I'm exaggerating, but I'm trying to prove a point there. That kind of friendship is what you look for. Does the story provide you with that? The second thing is chivalry, muru'a and futuwa. The idea of bravery with restraint, where you are able to, and this is Ashab al-Kahf is whom I'm using as a standard of evaluation, because Ashab al-Kahf, if you look at the story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls them or describes them with futuwa, right? And the kind of futuwa there is that they don't rebel against the tyranny that was being caused to them. Instead, they go and they retreat, which is not cowardice. The Qur'an defines that as bravery, because the futuwa, the youthfulness that is always present in everyone, even if you're physically old, there's still the youthfulness that is present within you. That youthfulness is always rebellious against tyranny, against any kind of opposition. That is where restraint falls apart. So look for stories that can demonstrate to you what it means to be brave, but with restraint, without reaction, with some sort of thought that goes into before an action is performed. Stories that provide you with honor that comes with humility, not with arrogance. Stories that show you what does it mean to find honor, to find valor, but to be humble at the same time. Stories that demonstrate what it means to protect the weak and to defend those who are oppressed. And stories that show you what it means to be accountable when you are given a position of power, no matter how small it might be. What does it mean to be accountable when you're given power, when you're given responsibility? This kind of chivalry is not bravery that's brute, which is what the modern American action hero is shown to be. You see, big muscular guy, gun, everywhere. This is what's going on in modern literature, in modern storytelling. It's all noise. There's no real meaning to that. Yeah, he beat up 20 people. So what? How does that help me be a better human being? That's the kind of question mark you would ask. See? That's how modern storytelling is working. That's not what we are talking about. Chivalry here. We're not talking about that kind of action hero who can go through a whole building without, taking a bullet or something like that. We're talking about ethical strength. We're talking about quwa muqayyada bil adab, a kind of strength that is cultivated through discipline. Stories that have that kind of a theme. Look for stories that have a teaching about love, but not love that is romance or intimacy. We're not talking about ishq. We're talking about mawadda and muhabba. We're talking about transcendental love. We're talking about things like mercy, kindness, sacrifice, fidelity, loyalty, responsibility. You see? Look for stories that have a capacity of justice in terms of virtue and morality in contrast to good and evil. Ummahat al-fadail is what we're referring to here. Wisdom and knowledge, hikmah, which is one of the fadail. Wisdom and knowledge. Does the story provide you with some provocation of thought? Does it teach you something? Does it bring your attention to a metaphysical reality that you did not know about? Does it highlight for you something about reality that you didn't know about? Does it show you how decisions are made with some sort of prudence, with wisdom? You see, courage and fortitude, shaja'ah, which is similar to chivalry, but this is more to do with the courage of the heart. The courage of somebody who may not be physically able to do something, but has the heart to do it. Those kinds of characters are the ones you want to read about. And then iffa, chastity and temperance, which is to do with things like patience, which should also be related to something like love. So in a story, which is, you would call a love story, do you see there a kind of restraint? Is there a temperance to that love? Or is it just the kind of sexual nonsense that appears in today's literature, where the characters can't control themselves? Because that's what's being demonstrated as proper human etiquette. You see, the characters they just can't control themselves. They have to go at it. On screen, off screen, wherever, doesn't matter. But that's not love, though it's presented as such. That's not love. True love is something that has within it a kind of restraint, a patience, a chastity, and in and of itself, the love is tempered, meaning it's controlled, because love is a passion, and it's a passion that can overwhelm. It can drive somebody insane, right? Layla and Majnun. Why was he called? I was telling my wife the story about Layla and Majnun the other day. Why was he called Majnun? It's because he had junoon about Layla. You see, he was crazy in love for Layla. In the Persian narratives, he would be called a diwana. You see, in Urdu, you have the same word, diwana, which means what? He's passionately crazy. Poetry has a way of doing that. It can drive somebody, it can fill somebody with passion to the degree of losing their sanity. And that's why poetry, a collection of poetry, especially love poetry, is called diwan. You see, Majnun, he was passionate about, so that love was so overwhelming. And the one who wrote that, he wanted to show that if this is the love of one creation for another creation, then what about the love of creation for his creator, whom he has never met, whose mercy and kindness upon him is infinite? What about that? You know, if Majnun goes into the home that Layla lived in and he's kissing the walls, and they say, have you gone crazy? Have you gone mad? And he says, there's nothing about madness here. It's just knowing that the beloved was here and she touched these walls. He's not insane in that sense, but it's his heart that is inflamed with passion. You see? So love has to be tempered, and you want stories that show you how to do that. that give you a teaching of how to do that. I'm not just talking about you, I'm talking about your children also, especially your teenage children. They need to understand, they need to know how to control their emotions, especially those emotions that are inflamed, like love, to be able to distinguish between true love and an infatuation with somebody, or a mere attraction. You see, something that is related to sexual appetite. That's not the kind of love you want to cultivate. You want to cultivate mawadda, transcendental love, love that will take you and teach you what it means to sacrifice for the beloved, what it means to be responsible for the beloved, what it means to be loyal to the beloved, fidelity. Because this is one of the cancerous diseases of modern society, is infidelity, where you've got men and women married having relationships with other men and women because they're not happy in the relationship. And infidelity is a legal problem. It's an actual, you can be charged with infidelity. It's a real problem because it destroys society. But it's prevalent, it's part of the modern world today. And it's because those people, those individuals, could never distinguish between the love of the heart and the love of the organs. They couldn't make the distinction between the two. Look for stories that have movement and stillness. Al-haraka was sakana, movement and stillness. Because these are the stories that have things like conflict and resolution, problem and solution, trial and success, trial and error through failure and success. You see, they demonstrate the kind of characters who want to achieve something but are always going through difficulty in achieving that. This has a much expanded has much more expanded dynamics, because these are the things that actually build the plot and the progression. So the actual plot of a story is built around those things. But the important thing about it is to understand by it that trial is something that grants endurance. Action teaches consequences. That's most important, because a lot of people, the youth especially, will do things not realizing or never thinking about the consequences of their actions. To understand that patience, waiting, with wisdom is part of decision making, where many people just make a decision without really thinking about it. They're really waiting to see and first let that thought take its form. They just make the decision instantly, and then they've got negative consequences to deal with. Look for stories that have an underlying philosophical and theological foundation. Because you have to understand that just as in real life, even in a fictional storytelling, nothing happens by random chance or occurrence. Everything happens with a reason, or for a reason. At the very least, you would be looking at, on the outward, you will be looking at causes and effects, whether it's in real life or it's in storytelling. But higher than that, there is a metaphysical reality. That metaphysical layer is very important, even in storytelling, because it helps you understand that there are unseen forces at work in the world, that there are conditions and variables, that it's a much more fluid environment. And then much higher than that, which is really the highest, is that there is a divine will operating above all of that. You want stories that give you that sense, even if it is not explicitly mentioned in there, but it is implied within that there is a higher will at play. Because those stories will help you understand why things happen, why these transformations take place, why does such and such a character go through this kind of trial and tribulation. They'll make you understand those things better. Lastly, you run stories that have truthfulness to reality. Sidq, amana, waqi'iyya, and akhlaqiyya. Real human condition. This means being honest and sincere about the human condition. Stories that have characters that are just, Superman type, that are completely invincible, that are basically God. Those are not stories. Those are the stories that you would classify as really as haram. Yeah, I mean, because they serve no benefit other than entertainment. And they don't really show you what the human condition is really about, because the purpose of storytelling is not to make you fantasize about something other than human. It is to make you understand what it means to be human. And so you want stories that are truthful to that reality, to that human condition, so that you can understand by it that, consequences, they don't just happen. Their actions have got consequences, and consequences have a price. There's a cost to them. You have to understand that that's part of the human condition, that you cannot attain virtue without making the effort to understand it, without making the effort to learn it in terms of your spiritual state. That evil is a real thing. It's not an ambiguous entity. Evil is a real thing. Modern stories you will find now, they want to present morality as something that's relativistic. And they're calling this moral relativism, right? That there's no such thing as real evil. And likewise, by implication being, there's no such thing as real good or as absolute good. It's all just ambiguous. It's all just relative. It's whatever whoever feels like it. This is why they're able to do all these LGBTQ things and just justify it as art, And you have to be careful. You need to find something that gives you a clear distinction of moral standpoints, because you want to learn those moral points from that story. And the story itself should demonstrate that healing, especially psychological healing, spiritual healing, takes time. So stories that can demonstrate that a tragedy, that a character is undergoing a certain kind of transformation, that healing, that trauma that the character is going through, it takes time. You want stories that reflect that. I think we can stop here, inshallah. I want to just read one passage from my favorite book, which is The Lord of the Rings. And I want to read this so as to also demonstrate why I think personally that Muslims should read The Lord of the Rings. And it's a passage that I actually just read the other day. And this passage takes place, I don't need to explain to anyone what The Lord of the Rings is. I think everyone has at least watched the films, even if nobody has read the books. But I would much prefer that people read the books than to watch the films, even though the films are good. They're not bad. But the books that's really what carries it. And this is in the Council of Elrond, in the chapter, the Council of Elrond. And they're sitting there and they're going through all these different discussions and whatnot as to what to do with the One Ring now that it has come to them. And, they go through all these different options. And then finally, one of them says, so there are but two courses, to either hide the ring forever or to unmake it. And so they only had two options that are remaining, that either they take the ring and go and hide it somewhere across the sea, or to destroy it completely. And so he says, well, both of these are beyond our power. So who will read this riddle for us? And so the Elrond says to them, none here can do so. None here can tell you what is the best option. We just have to sort of decide it amongst ourselves and evaluate what is best for us. And he says, at least none can foretell what will come to pass if we take this road or we take that road. So unless you have absolute knowledge of which road, which option, when you're making a decision, which option is going to give you the best results, unless you have complete knowledge of that, only then you will be able to fix the riddle. But insofar as the moment is concerned, you have to make a choice. You either take this road or you take that road. And here, it's not a decision about mundanity of life. It's between choosing, in light of good and evil, is what the choice is here. So he tells them here, but it seems to me now clear which is the road that we must take. The westward road seems easiest, therefore it must be shunned. The westward road, if you know the story where it's going, the westward road is to take it across the sea. And the eastern road is to take it to Mordor and to destroy it, to the enemy's lair, and to have it destroyed over there. He's saying that the westward road seems easiest, therefore it must be shunned. It will be watched. Too often have the elves fled that way. Now, at last, we must take the hard road, a road unforeseen. There lies our hope, if hope it be, to walk into peril, into Mordor. We must send the ring into the fire. He's saying we cannot take the easy road because evil is always watching the easy road, because evil expects us to take the easy pathway. This is Shaitan's, this is how he operates. He knows the human condition. And the human condition, when faced with a dilemma, will always take the easy pathway. And so he's saying here that it's obvious here what we need to do. We cannot take that pathway because it's the easy one. We have to take the hard one because that's the one he will be least expecting if we are to destroy this one object. And then they go through a little bit more of a discussion and whatnot until it comes down to, and then finally he says, thus we return once more to the destroying of the ring. So they decide, okay, we're going to destroy the ring. But even that, they don't want to do it because they don't know whether it's even going to work or it won't work. They have no idea. So thus we return once more to the destroying of the ring. And yet we come no nearer to making a decision. What strength have we for the finding of the fire in which it was made? That is the path of despair or folly, I would say. Sorry, that is the path of despair or folly, I would say, if the long wisdom of Elrond did not forbid me. One of the members of the council is saying, going to destroy the ring, going into the enemy's lair, into Mordor, that is a path of despair, or it's just foolishness. I don't see the plausibility of it. So Gandalf responds to him and says, despair or folly? Which one is it? You're saying it's a path of despair and folly, but is it despair or is it folly? Which one is it? And he gives his reasoning. He says, Gandalf says, it is not despair, for despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt. You can only despair if you know the complete outcome without any doubt, to say that it is definitely going to fail if I go this way. If I take this decision, it is definitely going to fail. I know the outcome, what it's going to be. Then only you can despair. But if you don't know what the outcome is going to be, if you don't know whether you're actually going to fail or succeed in that, then you can't despair. You have to hope. You have to hope for the best. You have to hope that you will succeed in that pathway. That's what he's trying to do. So he's saying, for those who see the end beyond all doubt, and we do not, we don't see the end beyond doubt. Then he says, it is wisdom to recognize necessity, meaning it is wisdom to understand and evaluate as far ahead as you possibly can. When all other courses have been weighed, though as folly it may appear to those who cling to false hope. So yes, it is going to appear as foolishness what you're doing if you cling to false hope, meaning you have to evaluate the pathway to the best of your ability and then hope that the outcome is going to be correct, it's going to be right. You have to trust in the divine unfolding. You cannot evaluate based simply on cause and effect. And then he says, well, in this case, let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy, for he is very wise and weighs all things to a nicety in the scales of his malice. It was very interesting here. He recognizes the enemy, which is Sauron, as being very wise. Wise meaning what? He's smart, he's intelligent. He measures all things, he calculates all things to its finest particulate perfection. But there is a flaw here. But the only measure that he knows is desire. Desire for power. And so he judges all hearts. He does measure, he does evaluate, but his measure of evaluation for the hearts of men is desire. He's measuring all the decisions that you will make, he's measuring them based on your desire. That's his unit of measure. So he will judge what decision you will make based on your desire of it. Into his heart, the thought will not enter that any will refuse it. The temptation of the ring. That having the ring, we may seek to destroy it. If we seek this, we shall put him out of reckoning. And this is why he says, even if it's false hope, cling to that. Because the enemy is blinded by that. So whether it's false hope or it's true hope, cling to hope. In the decision, that moral dilemma that you have in the face of evil, this is the moral teaching that the author Tolkien is going for in this story, is that against all odds, you will encounter yourself in such situations. You will find yourself in such a mode in which you have to make a decision against all odds, against, the very moral fiber of your being. If you must choose the more difficult path, because that's the path he least expects it. Who? Shaitan, Iblis. That's what the Qur'an teaches. أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْنِ وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ فَلَاقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةَ. He's not taken the steep path. I've given him 2 eyes, a tongue and 2 lips. He's not taken the steep path, the difficult path. Ibn Ata'illah says, if you're faced with a moral dilemma in this case, take the path that is most difficult, because doing that which is most difficult against the self is going to yield the greatest result. Choose the path that is most difficult, because that's the path that Iblis least expects you to take. And his measurement of your decision, his way of knowing which path you're going to take, of deciding or what decision you're going to make, is desire. He preys on your desires, on your temptation. That's his measure. So why you're despairing on that? Take the path and then hope for the best outcome from that path, because you don't know what the end is going to be. You don't know what's going to be the result of that. So you hope that the divine is going to unfold it for you, especially given that you're making a moral sacrifice. You're making a sacrifice. You're choosing the difficult road. You're going to sacrifice a lot of things on that road. You're going to lose a lot of things on the road. Don't you think your Lord is going to reward you with a favorable outcome? Anyway, I don't want to go into a whole discussion about the Lord of the Rings, but this is one of the books that I recommend that people, that Muslims should definitely read. It's not an easy book with the writing style. There are a lot of people who find it, I don't know. They find it. I don't find it difficult. For me. It's pretty good. Anyway, we can end here, inshallah. I think it's Maghrib time. We can take a quick break and then resume in maybe 10 minutes for some quick questions and answers. Jazakumullah khairan, inshallah. See everyone in a short while. Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum, Ustad.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I was waiting for somebody else to ask the question first. So, anyways, thank you for this session. It is really, I think it's a very important session, because this, as I also understand, literature or this telling of stories is a very important part of our lives. um, bear with me. So, like growing up, my grandfather, he used to tell us stories.
Mm,
And he used to tell us stories of, suppose, they had those gems in the courts of Akbar. So, Mullah Do
mhm,
Pyaze and Birbal and these stories. So, we children, we had a very different connection with him. And I don't think any one of us, I mean, when we sit and we pray, and we remember to make dua, I don't think we ever forget him, because that was the kind of connection that was built. They were not just anecdotes, they were like
mm,
stories, that gave some, um, I mean, some wisdom. They imparted wisdom.
mm,
Sorry, I mean, the stories from those lives. So I think, firstly, that part of it, we don't want to lose that, because technically now children are missing that kind of interaction with grandparents or elders. We used to sit with elders, we used to ask them about their stories, their life experiences. Those are also stories, because those, they play a great part in shaping the minds of the children. So that
mm.
is the first part. So first, if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, with children especially, it's much more profound because children don't learn through facts. They don't. That's not how they learn. They learn through feeling more, and at their age, the imagination is very, very alive. It's very active. Um, so they can immerse themselves more deeply into stories. I mean, I still remember the stories that I read when I was a child and stories that I heard being told to me. I still remember, like, I don't remember the actual content of it, like the words, but I remember the feeling and the sensation and what effect it had on me. Some of those were happy and some of those were sad. So with children, that's how they actually learn. So, parents who always ask, how do I teach my child manners and adab and all these things? It's the best way to teach them is through stories. That's really the best way to teach them. Now, how the story is told, that's what makes all the difference. And if you look, children are also being corrupted by stories, by YouTube stories, and by phone devices feeding them. Those are still stories. They activate the child's imagination. One of the YouTube channels is called Toilet Something. I forgot the name for it. Right? Yeah, yeah. And I didn't even know about this until somebody forwarded it to me or something, and I looked a bit into it, and I was really horrified that that's a child's YouTube channel. That it had over 50 million subscribers, and its primary audience is children, and then each of its videos had over 50 million plus views, and I just looked at some of the content that was there, and I was just horrified. But that's a story. That whole thing, that presentation, it's a story. It's got like a kind of a plot. It's got characters and whatnot, and children are immersed in that. Now that story has got no morals, no values, no virtue, no knowledge, no wisdom. It's empty, completely empty. There's no divinity. There's no supernatural. There's just absolute, it's nothing. It's just there's a plot and there's characters and there's just stuff happening, and then there's words that are being used that in and of themselves are empty words. They have no meaning, they have no definition, they have no expressibility, and children are absorbing that, so it's shaping their character. Much of what comes across of that content um, is filled with emotions like rage and uh, a kind of a tyrannical uh, mode of being that is then translated into the child's mindset. And That's how these children then behave with their parents and their seniors and their elders. And they speak those same words, and they speak it with such confidence as if they're saying something with meaning, when really they don't mean anything, and adults cannot understand them. Now, what's interesting about this phenomenon also is that rather than rectify the problem, meaning first of all, get rid of those videos somehow, I don't know, and give your children good content to be immersed in. And by good content, I mean books, actual books, words that they can learn. Rather than do that, parents and teachers are changing their vocabulary to be able to communicate in those same words, those nonsensical, garbage, made-up words. So I know it's just strange the way modern society functions. Like there's no akal whatsoever anywhere. But with children, they're very absorbent, and they may not get the fact of it, but they will make the connection of such a character did like this because of this, that, and that. And if they had done this, then this would have happened to them. They actually make that connection. And it molds them, it shapes them, it shapes some of their decisions. So as parents, curating stories for your children is part of the tarbiyah and the ta'aleem that you will give them. You can't sit them down and teach them the checklists of fiqh or the conditions of aqidah or what are the 5 pillars and expect them to be morally, upright. Once you've told them what Islam is, so now they're going to be like pious individuals. You need to be able to mold their understanding of those things. Then they will grasp the spirit of it. When they see that Islam represented in that story, where they can actually see an example of it in a way that also affects them positively, then they will better appreciate its truth, and it becomes embedded in them. Mm-hmm.
Malik learn about Rasulullah through song,
mm-hmm.
and the 5 pillars through song.
Right.
Now he's not lived.
Yeah.
So he's associated his birth and the year and his mother through the song.
Right. Yeah, that's a kind of it's more it helps in terms of memorization. It's a mnemonic device.
Not raw fact.
But not raw fact, yeah. It doesn't come out as raw fact, because what the mistake I've seen a lot of parents do in their pedagogy of teaching their children is that they're just going to provide them with the raw constituents, the raw facts, and say, this is what Islam is, and then this is what the Prophet, and this is, but in the way that the story, the way it's delivered, that's what matters, because children don't understand facts. They don't know what is right and wrong at that age. They don't, their reasoning faculty is not yet fully developed, even though they do reason. But they reason more emotionally than they reason rationally. So giving them what you would read in a non-fiction book, like if you were to read, let's say, Fiqh Sira, for example, this book I have by Muhammad al-Ghazali is an Egyptian scholar. He's got a very different narrative style than Martin Ling's, for example, The Life of Muhammad. Both are books on the Sirah, but Muhammad al-Ghazali, he just gives you the plain facts. He just tells you this happened, this happened, this happened. Here's the hadith, here's the evidence. It just gives you that. It just gives you raw information. But Martin Ling's, he gives you a whole elaborate way of explaining the narrative. And he uses that high language, so you kind of have to take time. But once you get it, once you grasp it, it just sticks in your mind. It's just amazing. If you read, like for example, if you read Ibn Ishaq, sorry, not Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham, which is the summarized biography of the Prophet from Ibn Ishaq, he's got the dialogues in there, and he's got certain elaborative ways of saying things, which is just, when you read that from Arabic, it just sticks to your mind. It's because it just immerses you. You feel like you're right there and you're seeing the whole thing happening. That's the imaginative faculty being activated. The same is true for adults. It's just that in adults, because of you've got so much else going on, your imagination is not that activated, but you can activate it and you can capitalize on that activation. You just need to take the time out to do it. You see? So if you're looking for ways to relieve stress from everyday life, then reading is your best option. Just take a book and read. Reading before bed is one of the best things that you can do for good sleep and complete, stress alleviation. Just like 5-10 minutes before bed, before going to, like, the last thing you would do is to read a story, because the story is going to activate your imaginative faculty, and you're going to go to sleep when the imagination is highly active, which means that you're going to experience lucid dreams and vivid dreams, which is a good thing. It's healthy for your sleep. It's going to help you resolve a lot of psychological problems through your sleep also. So that's it's something that is beneficial for adults also. It's why, children, if you read them stories before going, they love it. They just love reading stories before going to sleep, or falling asleep while you're giving the story. And they'll have just the most amazing dreams. If you remember your own childhood, I don't know if you can remember the dreams themselves, but you could probably remember the experience that you had of falling asleep when somebody was telling you a story. It's just the most sweetest thing that you could experience as a child, other than everything else in your childhood. But that was a long answer. You have another question?
Yes, Ustad. I was this question was in my mind for a couple of days, and I was don't misunderstand my question, but when we recently had Christmas celebrations around the place, and Christians are generally more loving people. They are more kind-hearted. Even when they give the message of Christmas, say in their schools, it's always about love and mercy and being kind to others. The traditional Christians. While if we come to Muslims, and we have more like a concept of strictness and responsibility and doing what is right. So again, this comes to children, but as far as cultivating goodness in people around us, especially growing children, the concept of love is more appealing than this concept of always, haram and halal. And so I was thinking, did we go from a prophet that is Isa alayhi salam, who's just known for he's just, people take him as a loving prophet, somebody who sacrificed life for the people, to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as being the role model of doing the right thing always, of being upright. So how can we get that balance? Why did we take the love away from Islam?
Because I think most of us, we failed to understand our Nabi. I think that's just what it is. We failed to understand our prophet, unlike our predecessors. We've turned his mission into a kind of a dogma and a doctrine that is supposed to be followed like in black and white sense, and we've just felt, because if we look at, it's why I really wanted to do the seerah, because regardless of all other issues that we could sit and discuss and learn and study, which are also important, philosophy and eschatology and all these things are also important, especially the times we're living in. But all that would mean nothing if we did not really understand how to apply that knowledge. And the way to apply that knowledge is through the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. You see, that story that I mentioned about Ibn Nafis, why I also like that story so much is, first of all, it's written by somebody who's really a master of language and a master of life itself. In terms of biological life, he's a doctor. at that time, a phenomenal individual. He wanted to show that you cannot arrive at understanding of divinity, of understanding God, unless you understand the Nabi, the prophet who is sent down to him. And he wanted to show there that bridge is a necessary bridge, that you cannot reach God unless you go through the prophet, which is something that even in modern times is something to be considered, because a lot of people, Sharia, Qur'an only. If there are all these other people who are hadith cancelers and we don't trust the hadith because like this and like Bukhari was 200 years after, all these nonsensical excuses. Qur'an only, brother, Qur'an only. You see, and then they come up with this rigidity, which if you look at the Prophet's life, his life was a rahmah. You see, he was sent rahmatan lil alamin, as a mercy unto the worlds. Everything he did was through rahmah. He was never that aggressive individual, even though in circumstances, which we will see inshallah when we come to the part of the seerah in Medina, where he has to make strong decisions. Even in those circumstances, there was wisdom that was executed. And the Prophet ﷺ, what's interesting about him is that he was the embodiment of what you would call masculinity, of manhood, of rujula, and futuwa, and chivalry. He was the embodiment of that. In the sense that he also acknowledged those feminine qualities that a woman would exhibit more than a man. Things like softness, kindness, being considerate, being empathetic, being sympathetic towards the issues, the concerns, the problems, the difficulties that other people would be going through. He didn't just come around and throw Sharia on the table in front of everybody and slap them with it. He would understand what that other person would, and he would give nasiha. He would give wise counsel to them. So this softness is what we've lost in the modern times. And this is the problem with modern Muslims, is when you have that kind of rigidity, then it just becomes, when I was young and I used to read stories, sometimes I used to do it by hiding, because I didn't know how other Muslims would react to that. So I never told my friends and whatnot that I read storybooks, because I didn't know how their parents and what would react to that, maybe or something. But my teacher, my ustad, he never objected to that. In fact, he used to give us stories. He used to sit us down and tell us different stories about the jinn and stranger. Sometimes he would cite like a story from the Arabian Nights, the 1000, which is another just amazing story. The 1001 Arabian Nights, which is a story of love, actually. And it's really amazing, because the Sultan, he faces betrayal. And so he goes into this destructive mode of every night he weds, and then in the morning he kills his wife, because he just felt betrayed, and he applied that betrayal to every woman, right? And because his wife, went off with his brother, and he didn't take that. He didn't take that kindly. But then Shahrazad, who's now, she dares to come into his house. She starts telling the story the first night, and he hears her, and then she stops deliberately, and that's her genius. Like she's clever in that sense, and she stops the first night, and then he's eager, like he's finished the story. And then she says, well, I can't now, because the sun is going to come up and you have to kill me, as is your custom. And then he says, no, I'm not going to kill you tonight. I'll kill you after you finish the story. So the next day she starts another story. She finishes this one, starts another one, and then stops halfway. And then this goes on for, Alf Layl wal Layl, for 1001 nights, 1001 stories. And by the time it's done, he decides not to kill her, because at that point now he's fallen fully in love with her. And it's not that he loved, it was not about infatuation or any such thing. Though the stories, they're not stories for children, actually, so you kind of have to be careful. Don't read those to your kids. But as for a mature audience, the tale is he falls in love with her wit, with her intellect, with her ability to entice him and enchant him and keep him, engaged with her. That's what he fell in love with. But anyway, so sometimes my ustad would highlight like the story of Aladdin and Ali Baba and the 40 thieves and those type of stories. But this rigidity, it's just strange. There's a lot of people who didn't want to buy my book, The Amulets, when I released it. I remember having a conference, attending the conference in Toronto at the RIS, and there are all these, really rigid Muslims just walk by with like, their noses in the air, like this is haram. I don't touch this kind of stuff because it's a fictional story. So, but anyway, I mean, everyone has their tastes. But what I don't appreciate in people is to use religion as a justifier, especially when what you're doing is actually false. It's not correct. To dissuade people, to tell them that fiction is haram, it's just lies. It's the Prophet never did that, or the Sahaba never did that. Yeah, they did. They told stories. They listened to stories from each other. They exchanged poetry. The Prophet loved that. He never dissuaded that, especially stories that had good moral foundations, good strong teachings. He encouraged that. So it's not there in our tradition. This is all made up Sharia. I don't know where they're getting that stuff from, but it's not there in the tradition. And that's why some of the greatest scholars of our tradition were also some of the greatest storytellers. If you read Ghazali, he's not giving you a manual. He's not giving you instructions. He's leading you through narrative. He's so amazing. He can immerse you in storytelling, even though what he's giving you is facts. It's not, he doesn't have characters and plot and all that, but just his way of articulation, it's a narrative style. That's a way, it's a style of narration in our in literature, in the science of adab, in the Arabic sciences. It's a way of narration. So why even though he's giving you the same information relatively as with other scholars, you would feel immersed if you were reading his work in Arabic, especially. You'd feel immersed because of his narrative style, his rhetorical devices, his way of discourse, his way of speaking to you across the page. You literally feel like he's talking to you. That's good writing. There are many stories like that. There's the story of anyway, I could go on and on this, but did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. It's been really informative, and also the previous beautiful language that we've done in the Hikam and also with Imam al-Ghazali. They've been really life-changing. So we can only pray for you. That's the thing. And can you recommend some books also? Would you recommend that?
For yourself, adults, or for children?
After we did the Hikam and you suggested the Lives of Man, I've done that. And
Right.
some would you recommend?
The Lives of Man is good. There is a book, Tasheel al-Nashatain, Tafsil al-Sa'adatain. It's by Imam al-Raghib al-Isfahani. If that's a very good book. What's the English for that? It's like a tasheel is like getting hold of the two the two modes. I'm doing a very bad thing at translating that, but I'll message the title. I actually wanted to do that book as second level psychology. Adil was asking me about it just the other day. In fact, I think Adil has Adil, you have the English version, right? You can maybe post a picture of that on the group, and they can find that translation of it. That's a good
Yes,
book. I
sir.
think it's ideal to read after Ghazali's Kimia, because it sort of just builds on that. It's a small expansion of that. It's a very nice book.
Right. Jazakallah khair, Ustaz.
Ustad, I'll read a question from the chat.
Mhm.
Could you please recommend some books preferably non-fiction for a beginner who's wanting to develop habit of reading and seeking knowledge.
Non-fiction?
Yeah, it's written like that, non-fiction. Yes.
I mean, non-fiction really could be any, because it depends on the subject of study, right? So it could be anything. But in terms of seeking knowledge, it's always good to learn about the etiquette of knowledge. So I would point you towards Imam al-Ghazali's Kitab al-Ilm, his book on knowledge. It's the first book of the Ihya Ulumuddin. That's a good starting point. There's a simplified version of that. It's called The Etiquette of Seeking Knowledge by Bakr Abu Zaid. That's a very good book. It's like a simplified version of Ghazali's Kitab al-Ilm. So that's a good starting point to read for someone who wants to learn or wants to go on a path of knowledge. But ideally, it's good to, these are not going to be books of study per se. You're not going to study knowledge from them. These are more like supplementary reading. So it really depends on your subject of study. And then I could recommend based on that. Whatever I know on my part. So inshallah, you can send me a message or post on the group and I'll respond to that, inshallah. Now, I have a question here. 3 questions. Many people have read a lot, but they do not show themselves as being cultivating real wisdom. Why is that? Well, it's mainly because of the psychology of reading or the type of reading that somebody does and how immersed they are in what they're reading. So a lot of people will read to finish a book. Really, they start the book and then it hooks them, and so they want to know how it ends, and so they'll read it for that purpose. A lot of other people will read a book for entertainment purposes, and that's all they're doing, that's all they're gaining from that. It's just entertainment. So it's a story, it's immersive, it's got good characters, good dialogue, it's got all the good things about, or the good checklists, the mark checklist of a good story. But the story itself is empty, which is really a lot of stories these days. So it's like you could watch a film, for example. It's a good film, good effects, good visualization, cinematography, everything. The script is well balanced, the progression, the pacing, all those things are good. After an hour and a half, 2 hours, you don't remember anything. You probably don't even remember who the characters were or what the name was or whatnot. There's no further engagement to that. Now, so that's the second part of reading, is the reflection and the contemplation. A good book, if it's read the way it's supposed to be read, should not only encourage you to read it again, but after having read, even if it's a section at a time, there should be some kind of reflection on it, some thought back. And that's when, if you read it by immersing yourself into the story, then you will probably get something out of it. Means you need to see the story from the lens of the character, not to see yourself in the character or to see yourself in the story. Don't try to project yourself onto whatever the narrative is. You need to see it from the lens of the character and what the character is seeing and what they're doing and the decisions they're making. You need to be able to ask those questions. Why are they doing that? Why did they say this? Why did they go here and not here? You need to try and figure that out and try to draw out that understanding from that. Once you're able to answer the why questions, where understanding finally takes place. And then that was something that you could then, you find it cultivated. And it's the same for nonfiction as well. You can read it, you're reading the words, but you're not really getting anything. And so those words are not really changing you. They're not really affecting you. So the message is not getting across, basically. There's tons of people who read the Qur'an, they recite the Qur'an, but you don't see any change in them. It's because the words are not really transforming them. They're not understanding. See, understanding needs to take place in order for some sort of transformation to take place. But understanding is not something that comes from the external entity, from the book into yourself. No, it's your own involvement in it. How much of your attention are you giving to it? So you need to put yourself in that mode. Now, a lot of people, Muslims, I would say now, Muslims don't really read fiction that much. So with nonfiction, they will read, but only if the topic intrigues them somewhat, right? They will read that subject book, or if the author is somebody they like a famous sheikh or something, they'll probably read it based on that. This is the bandwagon fallacy. They only jump on the thing that's most popular. But when it comes to fiction, a lot of Muslims don't actually read fiction that much, and so they don't know how to read fiction, I would say, is why it doesn't really affect them, or it doesn't really transform, or they will, just dismiss it as something that's okay, waste of time, because they don't know how to engage with fiction, because it's not about the components of the story. I always say, even for the Qur'an, I always say the same thing. It's not about the components of the ayah. This is the components that are in the ayah. They're assembled that way to deliver a message. The message is what's most important. That's what you need to look for. The same thing applies to any other kind of reading. It's not the components themselves. It's what message is being delivered here. If the author decided to show you this scene in this plot, why are they doing that? What's the message? What's the point of this? Right? Is there any other question in the chat, Adil, or I can read? There's 2 more questions I have here.
I'll start one more question, which is,
Okay.
can we get some good recommendations on literature that's all classic elements? Perhaps even from Chinese classics, if Ustad knows any.
I don't know from Chinese classics, but from our classics, when I say our, I mean like English. From Muslim classics, the few that I mentioned, there are others as well. The only thing is that I would not recommend you read those in translation. I would recommend you read those in the source language. So if you know Farsi, I could give you a few recommendations. Like the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi is very good. Very nice in terms of classics. I like it. I have difficulty reading that, so I have to use a Farsi dictionary, but I can relatively understand what because Farsi and Urdu kind of have the same grammar, so I can work out what he's saying. But I've much of my reading is English, so I could recommend on the English side. Shakespeare is something you should definitely read. Homer's Iliad is something good to read. However, those 2 are a bit advanced, especially if you're not conversant with literature. So I wouldn't recommend that as the starting point. I would recommend you read something like the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. That's a good series to read. His writing was mainly for children, so his style and his vocabulary is designed for that. But the story is very good, and it's got mature elements. Those books, they don't have any vulgarity or any sexual content, which is why I think it's very good reading. C.S. Lewis was a Catholic, and his Catholic influence was actually Tolkien, who convinced him to sort of come back into religion. And that's when he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. So he's sort of embedded Christian value and Christian theology into those stories. So you have to be kind of on the lookout for that. That's not really why you're going to be reading C.S. Lewis. You're reading it mostly to see the virtue, because in Christianity and in Islam, we share the same virtues. We have different Sharia and different Aqidah, but we share the same virtues. We share the same virtues of wisdom and knowledge, and of kindness to the poor and the needy, and of chivalry and bravery, and of avoidance of sin and temptation. So we share all those things, and therefore, reading that is not going to damage your iman or cause you to commit a a sin or something like that. So it's good reading as a starting point for C.S. Lewis. Another good classic I will recommend, if it's your taste that you like detective stories, is Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is by Arthur Conan Doyle. It's a very good story. The language is clean. It, again, doesn't have vulgarity. It has a depiction of street language as it was spoken at that time, late 19th century. But otherwise, the stories are very well written. And if you can follow along, it really engages, especially your logical faculties, because it makes you want to solve the crimes with Sherlock as he's going through his science of deduction. So it's a very good story to read. Overall, I will recommend for all Muslims, Muslims should read Tolkien. The Lord of the Rings, especially. Muslims have to read Tolkien. That's like my primary recommendation. You have to read Tolkien. I can't really explain it to you why, but it basically has all the characteristics that I mentioned today of suhbah, companionship, of mawadda, of love, of shuja'ah, of futuwa, of muru'ah, of all these things which are in Islam. They're part of Islam. Tolkien himself was a Catholic Christian, and he was very devout. He did not like the idea of industry and industrialization. He did not like the idea of secularization. He did not like any of the things that we are encountering today. And he wrote this story based on that. He wanted to demonstrate the simplicity and the virtue of religion. And so throughout his whole story of Lord of the Rings, the idea of a divine presence is echoed throughout the whole thing. And if you look at even just that small passage that I read, it was just one paragraph. It's just phenomenal in terms of his prose. It's a bit high, so it'll take you some time to really grasp it. Maybe have to do a couple of reads after that. But through all of his characters, you will see all kinds of beautiful exemplifications. The idea of masculinity in men, and the idea of femininity in women, in the characters that he depicts. The idea of leadership and rulership. The idea of guidance, the idea of teaching, the idea of friendship and fellowship, which literally is the title of his first book, The Fellowship of the Ring, which was really the core theme of his whole thing, was friendship, and how friendship can get you through life, and how friendship, that's a very strong element in Islam of companionship. And just the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr, just amazing. With Omar and with Uthman and all his friends, they supported him. They helped him. So these are all core. I don't want to use the word Islamic because I don't like that word, but these are core themes in Islam. So I think it's really necessary for Muslims to read Tolkien.
Our parents have a very negative connotation towards friends.
Yeah, I don't know why. These are cultural stipulations that I think, I don't know. I don't know really.
They even tell us to make sure children don't have friends.
Yeah, I don't know why that is, but friends are a very important part of, companionship is part of Islam, and it's very much encouraged. So that's a cultural thing, a cultural stigma that needs to be addressed.
They feel like they should be limited to us.
Yeah, it's not right. It's not appropriate, because it becomes difficult, especially in the development of children when they enter into their teenage years. There are certain things that they cannot explain or express themselves to parents or even to siblings, and they need that external shoulder. So friends are very important, but these are kind of friends that have a positive influence. And there are many ahadith that actually exemplify that. Keeping the company of good friends is something that helps the believer. What else? These are the books I have right now. So these are the books that I would recommend that people start with before venturing elsewhere. And in all real sense, these are all the books you will actually need. So was there another question? Or maybe I can read one out here.
No, Ustad, there's no other question.
Okay, so the other question was, other than The Lord of the Rings, what other books? Okay, so I already answered that. What age should children start moral chapter books? Oh, at the age that they can read. As soon as they can start reading, which would be at the age of maybe around 8, 9 years old. Eight, I think, is a good age because they're able to, they have a bit of a longer attention span. So giving them chapter books. Chapter books are basically books that have a long story and they have like divisions, like chapters. And so the story progresses through that. A good book for them to start with is a book like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That's a good book. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That's a very good book by Roald. In fact, all of Roald Dahl's books are good because his writing style is he's got eccentric characters who do eccentric things, and he's got really witty kind of plots that really activate the child's imagination, and that's really what he's trying to do, is to activate that imagination, to make them more thirsty for reading. So those are good books, Roald Dahl's books. They're good. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and there are a few others. I don't remember the titles anymore, but those are good books. Which other book? Alice in Wonderland is a good book also, especially if you want your children to really get a hang of English grammar and logic and grammar, because the author who wrote that book was a logician, and he wrote that book to show you all the fallacies in logic. So Alice Down the Rabbit Hole, Alice in Wonderland, it's basically full of logical fallacies, and it's not full of logical, like he does it deliberately to show you the fallacies, right? So the queen says, hang her and then we'll hold the trial. And then you see, so Alice then counters that and says, but where I come from, we do the trial first and then we do the hanging. And the queen says, no, over here, that's how we do things. So he's showing you and this book is very good because it makes children see reason or sense in sequence of events. And you can hold a test with them afterwards. You can give them a false rule, and you will actually see them counter that rule to say that doesn't make sense because, the logic doesn't match up. So Alice in Wonderland is a good book for them. As they progress, when they reach the age of like 10, 11, then books like Narnia are good for them. And as they come into now their teenage years, then Lord of the Rings is very good for them. But there are other books that they can read as well, inshallah. I mean, I can't really go through the whole list of everything right now. But don't restrict them to only reading fiction. Try and also push them towards reading nonfiction, but good narrative. So, but not nonfiction that's going to be overwhelming in terms of, like it's like they're forced to read a textbook or something. The Qasas al-Anbiya, those are very good. The stories of the prophets. If you can find, a good narration, narrative style of Qasas al-Anbiya, the stories of the prophets, that's excellent. That will also give them access into the Quran, because much of the Quran is through the stories of the prophets and their exemplification. So when they have that as a firm grounding, then it will give them access to the Quran as well. Okay, those are the questions. Any other questions?
So I'll ask one question then.
Yes, Bismillah.
Uh, how do you recommend reading biographies and autobiographies of famous people like Malcolm X? And I think in the chat, the first question actually, the last part was right now I am reading autobiography of Malcolm X, which I forgot to ask. Yes, that was the first question, and that it was there. So, how do you recommend reading autobiographies and biographies of famous people?
Oh, it's a good thing to read those biographies of not famous people. It's not about famous people, it's about people who have made great achievements in life. Those kind of people you want to read about, not just famous people. So, reading about Mahatma Gandhi, for example, reading about, like, you're reading Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, reading about, like, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, if you're in Pakistan, about Muhammad Iqbal, many other individuals, even the poets, if you read their biographies. The idea there is to try and understand their lives and what influenced them, and how did they go about achieving what they achieved, so that you can implement some of their practices. Their doings can have a positive influence on you. So reading about those biographies is a good thing. I read the biography of every author that I read. Like, if I read their works, I read their whole biography, as much information as I can get. And I study their biography as much as I can before I read their books, because I want to understand what is it that they're bringing to the table. I want to know, because this is part of understanding the khalaf of an individual. Ikhtilaf is a foundational thing in our tradition, and ikhtilaf really comes from the individual's background, how it affects or influences what they are bringing into their worldview. So I read the biography of every author that I study, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. I read their biographies. I try to understand the author, their life, as much as possible, to know, what did they go through that affected them, that influenced them to produce this work. And I think the one individual that I have read most in their biography, aside from the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, is Imam al-Ghazali. I think I've read more about Imam al-Ghazali than anybody else, because there's information about him, a lot of information about him, but he's just a fascinating individual to even read about. But I've done that with every scholar, and this is part of our tradition in the sciences as well. If you remember, we do the Mabadi Ashra, right? The 10 principles of every science. One of them is knowing al-wadi', the originator or the founder of the science, or the founder of the author of the text, or the one who made the theory, is to know as much as you can about that individual. So that's a good thing to read, but not famous because they are famous, but because they made a positive influence on society. And so it's good to know who they were and what they did. Yeah. Did I answer your question, Adil?
Yes, Ustad. And one last question. How about travelogues? Travelogue, like Muhammad Asad's book, A Road to Mecca.
Well, this is more of a personal taste. I think travelogues are a waste of time. That's just my personal taste. I mean, there are people who like travelogues and they find benefit in there, but I think that's writing a travelogue and then and actually publishing it, and then those who read a travelogue, I think it's a waste of time. And Imam al-Ghazali also thought it's a waste of time. Maybe that's my influence on it, but I just don't like travelogues. For those who don't know, a travelogue is like somebody who travels to somewhere, like you go on a journey and then you write about it, what you found there, what you encountered, and your experience and all that. And it's not all that difference from, I think, most YouTubers today. It's just that you now have video logs instead of written work, which is a travel log. But it's essentially the same thing. I really don't care what your experience was. That's for you. I mean, if you had a good experience, you had a good experience. But I don't need to know what experience you had there. Unless you have something to offer as a learning, as something that you can teach, that this is my experience and I understood something like that. That's different, but that wouldn't fall into as a travelogue. So I don't know. I don't really read travelogues. That's my personal taste. So I'm not going to discourage anyone if that you like. There are some travelogues that are that could offer some benefit. I mean, people have, like Ibn Battuta, for example, was a famous traveler of Islam, of our tradition. He traveled far and wide at that time, and he documented everything he traveled. But Ibn Battuta, they say that he had written, this was his travel log, but it wasn't actually. A travel log that's not, Ibn Battuta was a historian, and he was a socialist, a sociologist. And that's what he was writing. So he went to different places and he studied the cultures and the peoples there, and he wrote about them. So Ibn Battuta's works actually are not considered travelogues. They are considered like encyclopedic works for those who study sociology and history. That's different. That's different from somebody who's just traveled and has written their experience about the travel. Unless you're planning to go there, maybe it might benefit you. But otherwise, I don't see any real benefit in that. Anyway, anything else?
No, sir. I think we can end the session. For this beautiful session, inshallah. And I think there was one message that which is the topic is comprehensive and complex. I request you to conduct more session on this subject to get us familiar with the subject. This was a message from Sister Tahira.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it is a new, kind of a relatively new subject, especially among Muslims. I don't know of any scholar who's actually discussed fictional literature in general. But to go into I was actually writing a book on this. I had like a few chapters that were written on this, on literature and reading. And I haven't finished it yet, but inshallah, I'll have that one finished in time. But if you would like, what I can do is I can have literary sessions with you, if you would like to have that with me. Have not a book club per se, but more of a literary session in which there would be a lot of reading to be done on your part. But what I can do is help you understand what it is that you're reading. And I can recommend the book for you, for anyone who wants to participate, inshallah, and I can hold the session as a part of literature. And I can explain how literature functions and how to really benefit from it. But I'll use it as an example. Instead of giving you the theory of it, which is what today's session was really, it was more of a theory. Instead of giving you a theory on literature, I can take you through literature to show you how to read and how to abstract understanding and how to interpret and contemplate and reflect on what it is that you're reading. I can do it through practice. So if you're okay with that, and if we have enough participants, then inshallah we can hold a session on that. Not one session, probably be several sessions until we can complete the text, whichever book that we're going to read. Yeah.
Okay, sir. I think we can end the session, inshallah.
Okay. نعم إن شاء الله. سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاكم الله خيرا. Thank you everyone for coming and for participating. جزاك الله. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, increase you in knowledge, and open up doorways for you into a whole different world of imagination. Jazakumullah khairan.